When I stepped into the room full of birthday guests with a black eye, the shock was immediate, and the entire space went silent. Conversations cut off and glasses frozen mid-air as every gaze locked onto the purple bruise blooming around my left eye that no makeup could conceal. My son Griffin moved forward and with a loud, proud tone declared it was my wife who put her in her place so she'd learn some respect. "I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you're listening from. Welcome to Stories of Mom Donna." Sloane Whitmore, my daughter-in-law, straightened up beside him with a smug little smile that told everyone she was pleased with the damage she had caused while she stared at me like I was worthless. Then my brother August walked right up to Griffin, and what he said in that moment turned my entire world upside down, because that was the day I realized I was losing my son but rediscovering myself. I should explain how I ended up standing there publicly humiliated, how I went from being a loved mother to becoming the intruder in my own house, because this didn't begin with a punch. It started much earlier with sugar-coated words and fake kindness that hid hostility. 3 years earlier, when my husband Harold passed away, it felt like the world went gray as he slipped away one cold morning from a sudden, massive heart attack without giving me a chance to say goodbye, and 1 second, he was warm next to me. The next, he was gone forever, leaving me drowning in grief. I cried in the shower so Griffin wouldn't hear. I cried while stirring dinner. I cried staring at the empty pillow beside me, but I forced myself to be strong because my son had lost his father too. The home we shared was our safe place, a beautiful 2-story house with a big yard and sunlight pouring through large windows, a place Harold had bought back when Griffin was a kid, and he had made sure everything was in my name. "It's yours, Evelyn. Don't ever let anyone take what we built together." He told me months before the end, as if he somehow knew what was coming, and after signing every document, I officially owned that home and the history inside its walls. Griffin stayed with me after the funeral, saying, "I'm not going to leave you alone, Mom." While we sipped morning coffee before he headed to his construction job, always returning exhausted but smiling. We shared dinners and Sunday movies and talked about Harold, remembering and missing him together, and I cooked his favorite meals while Griffin repaired anything that broke, and it felt like we were still a team, still a family, and I believed it would last. Then Sloane showed up, a confident, polished event coordinator with glossy dark hair, perfect nails, and designer outfits, who hugged me on her first visit with a practiced smile and chirped, "Mr. Mercer talks about you so much." It's wonderful to finally meet the woman who raised such an amazing man. And I wanted to take her at face value. I put effort into a special dinner, baked chicken, seasoned just how Griffin liked with fresh salad and warm cornbread, but she barely touched the food, pushing it around while commenting about carbs and calories before smirking at the cornbread and saying, "I barely eat grains. You have to take care of yourself, right?" Which sent a strange discomfort through me. She kept showing up for dinners being all polite, but I noticed her eyes scanning the place, judging the decor, saying things like, "This living room is so classic. I guess it's like 30 years old, right? Modern styles are so different now." Or staring at photos on the wall and remarking, "It's sweet to hold on to the past, Evelyn, but sometimes yesterday takes up too much space for tomorrow." Griffin was too in love to notice anything, and when I tried mentioning little concerns, he brushed me off with, "Mom, Sloane just wants to help. Organizing is her thing." So I stayed quiet, not wanting to seem like the controlling mother-in-law, and forced myself to welcome her. 6 months later, they had an elegant wedding. She coordinated every detail while telling me, "I've got everything handled, Mrs. Mercer. Just relax and enjoy." And as I watched them exchange vows, a tight ache formed in my chest because I missed Harold. He would have known exactly how to handle it, and he would have noticed what I was slowly beginning to realize. After the honeymoon, Sloane moved into the house. "It's temporary, Mom," Griffin said, "just until we find our own place." I agreed because he was my child, and I would never refuse him a home, yet temporary stretched into 1 month, then 2, then 6. With each passing week, Sloane took over more space, rearranging the kitchen, replacing the dining room curtains, shifting the living room furniture while saying, "We just need to feel at home, Evelyn," paired with a sweet smile, and I allowed it, because I didn't want to create conflict. Soon she began throwing parties, inviting her friends and coworkers, people I had never met, filling the living room with loud laughter and drinks late into the night, and every time I showed up, suddenly the room went quiet and guests stared at me like I was a stranger, trespassing in my own house, and Griffin would whisper, "Mom, don't you want to go rest? We've got everything handled here." So I climbed the stairs, feeling pushed aside, unnoticed, unnecessary, and wondered if others had ever felt like a stranger in their own home, while someone else slowly took over everything, and you could do nothing to stop it. Month by month, the home stopped feeling like mine, not on paper, but in every detail that mattered. She redecorated without ever asking. One afternoon, I walked in to find the soft cream curtains Harold had chosen, replaced by cold gray ones, and she said while packing the old curtains into a box, "Those were outdated, Evelyn. These look more modern. You'll get used to it." But I didn't want to adjust. I wanted what was ours. I wanted someone to ask before changing things Harold and I built together. Griffin was working longer hours, gone before sunrise, home after 9. We no longer shared dinners. I ate alone in the kitchen while they closed the dining room door, laughing together, and I realized I was no longer part of their conversations or my son's daily life. Every time I tried to talk, he barely looked up from his phone, saying, "We'll talk later, Mom. I have to check some emails." The words I needed to say always died in my throat. Sloane's comments turned sharper. One day, while I was cooking, she stepped in, wrinkling her nose, and said, "Evelyn, you use so much grease. The smell spreads everywhere." Then she placed a scented candle on the counter and added, "Use this after, please. My friends are coming tomorrow, and I don't want the place smelling like old food." Old food? She meant the stew Griffin had loved since he was little. After that, I cooked less and hid more in my room because the whole house felt hostile. Her magazines covered the table, her shoes sat by the door, her expensive perfume lingered in the air. I felt myself fading into a ghost, and Griffin either didn't see or chose not to. One night after 11, I slipped downstairs for water, thinking everyone was asleep, but I heard voices through the partly open den door. Sloane spoke in a firm, low tone. "We can't keep doing this, honey. This house is too big for 3 people and your mother is getting older. She'd be better off somewhere smaller with others her age. There are great senior places. She'd have friends. She'd be happy." My heart pounded. Griffin stayed silent for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't know, Sloane. She's my mother. I can't just kick her out." Sloane let out a gentle laugh and replied, "It's not kicking her out, my love. We just need space. We could have this house all to ourselves, start our own family. Don't you want that?" I backed away before hearing whatever he said next and hurried upstairs on trembling legs, locking myself in my room, burying my face in a pillow to muffle the sobs because they wanted me gone. They wanted my house, the home Harold left to me. The place where I raised my son, and Griffin was actually considering it as if I were outdated furniture that didn't match their new style. The next days were unbearable. I couldn't look at Sloane without feeling sick. She knew I overheard, and her eyes told me she enjoyed it. She became even more possessive, saying, "Evelyn, could you knock before entering the living room? Sometimes we're having private conversations." Every word a reminder that in my own house I no longer belonged. Or, "Evelyn, better not use the washer after 7 o'clock. The noise bothers us when we're watching TV." The house suddenly had rules, rules I never agreed to, rules turning me into an unwanted visitor. I tried talking to Griffin. One morning I caught him before he rushed out the door. "Son, I need to talk to you." He was focused on his briefcase without even looking up. "What is it, Mom?" I took a slow breath. I said I felt like Sloane and I were not getting along, like I wasn't welcome in my own home anymore. He frowned and answered, "Mom, don't say that. This is your house." But he said it flat and robotic, like repeating something he was supposed to say. So I asked why I felt like I needed permission for everything, why I felt like a burden. He ran a hand through his hair, uncomfortable, and said, "It's just that Sloane likes having her space. It's nothing personal. Please be more flexible for me." Then he walked out, leaving me speechless. That night, Sloane threw another dinner. 6 guests arrived, filling the dining room with loud chatter and joking around. I was making tea in the kitchen when one of her friends walked in and stared at me, surprised, saying, "Oh, hello, I didn't know someone else lived here." Before I could respond, Sloane appeared behind her and said, "Oh, she's Evelyn, Griffin's mom. She lives here." The way she said, "She lives here," made it sound like I was squatting in my own home. They left laughing, and I stood alone, feeling small, humiliated, erased. Week after week, Sloane pushed further. She talked about renovations right in front of me, saying the kitchen was too old, suggesting new cabinets and an island, and explaining how much more the house would sell for. Sell. She said, "we," like it belonged to her, as if I didn't exist. Then my birthday came, 70 years old. Griffin said, "You deserve to celebrate, Mom," with a smile that reminded me of the boy he used to be, and for just a second hope flickered, maybe I still mattered. Sloane took control of everything, inviting relatives, friends, neighbors, decorating the living room with silver balloons, setting up fancy appetizers, and on the surface it looked perfect, but something underneath felt deeply wrong. That morning I went down for breakfast and she was in the kitchen on the phone but immediately hung up when she saw me. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said coldly. I tried being friendly and asked if she knew what day it was. "Yes, your birthday," she replied before adding, "and also the day you should make important decisions about your future." My hand froze midair, holding my coffee. I asked what she meant, and she folded her arms and said, "Griffin and I have been talking. We need this house, Evelyn. We want to start a family. We need space and privacy, and you. You need somewhere more suitable for your age." The floor felt like it moved. I said, "This is my house, Sloane." She smiled that poisonous little smile and said, "For now." I didn't know what to do. I went to my room, heart pounding, and sat trembling on my bed, staring at photos of Harold and me on our wedding day, and baby Griffin smiling back at me, wondering how everything had fallen apart. Later, I got dressed for the party, the ivory dress I bought for the occasion, trying to cover the exhaustion and stress on my face, but the mirror showed a worn-out woman losing control of her own life. I forced myself to go downstairs. Guests were coming. I couldn't hide on my birthday. Step by step, I descended and saw the living room transformed by Sloane into something stylish and flawless. But it didn't feel like my celebration at all. It felt like I was attending a party for someone else entirely. Then the first guests arrived. My brother August was among the first to arrive, and he hugged me tightly, whispering, "Are you okay? You look pale." And I forced a small smile, saying, "I'm fine, just a little tired," while he studied me with worry but didn't press further. More guests filtered in, cousins, old friends, neighbors, everyone greeting me with hugs and warm wishes, and for a brief moment wrapped in familiar affection, I almost forgot the tension eating away inside me. Sloane drifted through the crowd like a flawless hostess, offering charm and attention, and Griffin stood beside her, proud of his perfect wife, while I watched from a distance, feeling like I was viewing someone else's celebration instead of my own birthday, as if I were just an observer. At one point, Sloane approached carrying 2 glasses of wine, handed me one, and said, "Happy birthday, Evelyn," with that same pleasant smile that no longer fooled me, and I thanked her politely, saying, "Thank you for organizing all this, then." She tilted her head and replied, "It's the least I could do. After all, this house will soon be completely ours, and we want to start on the right foot," whispering it just for me, and it felt like a disguised threat. My chest tightened, and I needed air, so I excused myself and went upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom and gripping the sink while I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself I couldn't ruin my own party. I splashed cold water on my wrists and took slow, deep breaths until I finally stepped out into the hallway, only to find Sloane standing in front of my bedroom door, holding my jewelry box, the wooden one where I kept the few pieces Harold had given me over the years, and I asked with a shaking voice what she was doing. She turned without any hint of guilt and said, "Just looking. These pieces are very old, aren't they? They must be worth something." I rushed forward and snatched the box from her, telling her she had no right to touch my things, and she gave a soft, mocking laugh, saying, "Relax, Evelyn. I wasn't going to steal them. Though with what they're worth, they could help pay for part of the kitchen renovation." And anger burned up my throat, and I told her to get out of my room. She stepped close, so we were only inches apart, and said, "This isn't your room. This is our house, and the sooner you understand that, the better." Something inside me snapped after months of humiliation, silence, and being erased, so I said, "This house is mine. It's in my name. Harold left it to me, and you have no right," and my voice came out stronger than I expected. Sloane's expression dropped the polite act, vanishing, revealing something cruel as she hissed, "You're a ridiculous old woman stuck in the past. Griffin doesn't need you anymore. I'm his family now, and we'll get this house with or without your permission." I knew I should have walked away, but I couldn't, and I pointed to the door and told her to leave. She laughed loudly and said, "Call Griffin. Go ahead. He always believes me. Always." And the worst part was, we both knew she was right, but still, I repeated "out" and pointed again. Her eyes turned hateful, and suddenly she shoved me, and though it wasn't a hard push, I wasn't ready for it, so I lost my balance, slamming my hip against the dresser, and my hand slipped when I tried to catch myself, making me crash sideways. With my head hitting the nightstand, sending a sharp, blinding pain across my face as I touched my skin and felt blood near my eye. She stared down at me for a moment, and there was a flicker of fear, but she quickly covered it, saying coolly, "You tripped. All by yourself. You're old and clumsy. You fell." Then she looked at me one more time before leaving and closing the door behind her without a second thought. I stayed there on the floor, holding my swelling eye, feeling more crushed by the humiliation and helplessness than the physical pain. And after several long minutes, I finally managed to get up and look in the mirror where the bruise was, already darkening, and a cut above my eyebrow sent a thin trail of blood down my cheek. I dabbed my face with a towel and tried covering the mark with makeup, but it did nothing because the bruise was already too dark to hide. Downstairs, the music and laughter kept going like the celebration hadn't skipped a beat, while I stood alone upstairs, bleeding and shaken, and something inside me wanted to stay locked away until everyone left. But then I heard Griffin calling out, "Mom, come on, we're going to cut the cake," and I knew I couldn't hide on my own birthday, so I forced myself to go down each step feeling heavier than the last. The second I reached the bottom, the room fell into a stunned silence, and faces swiveled toward me with shock and confusion and discomfort filling the air like a thick fog. Griffin stepped forward, not with concern, but with some twisted sense of pride, and announced, "It was my wife who put her in her place, so she'd learn some respect," and the words hit like explosions as Sloane straightened proudly beside him, staring at me with cold, triumphant eyes. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and I stood there humiliated while my own son excused the assault against me, choosing her over me. Then August came pushing through the guests, red with anger, and he marched straight to Griffin, glaring with a fury I'd never seen, and asked, "What kind of man lets his wife assault his mother and then celebrates it in front of everyone?" in a low voice full of contempt. Griffin's face drained of color, and he stammered, "Uncle, it's not what it looks like." But August cut him off, saying, "Your father would be ashamed of you," and the silence that followed was suffocating. Griffin tried to speak, but nothing came out, and when Sloane grabbed his arm, August turned his glare to her, saying, "And you came into this family with lies. We all see it," as murmurs spread through the guests, and some avoided eye contact. A cousin checked on me, asking, "Evelyn, are you okay? Do you want us to call someone?" And I shook my head, refusing to cry in front of them. August gently guided me toward the kitchen, saying, "Let's go upstairs. I'll clean that wound for you." But before he could move me, Sloane screeched. "She provoked me. She insulted me. I was only defending myself," to which August responded, "Liar." And the single word hung like a blade in the room. Griffin finally reacted, stepping between them, shielding Sloane like she was the one being wronged, and said, "Uncle, that's enough. You don't know what happened," which made August let out a bitter laugh, saying, "I don't know, I'm looking at your mother with a black eye, and you're defending the person who hit her. I know exactly what happened." The guests started slipping out, some awkwardly, wishing me well, others disappearing without a word, and my birthday celebration crumbled into a humiliating nightmare. An older woman who had been a close friend of Harold came over and whispered, "Harold would never have allowed this. Take care, Evelyn," before leaving, and her words pierced me deeper than the injury. August sat me at the kitchen table, closed the door, examined my eye, then grabbed ice from the freezer, wrapped it in a cloth, and pressed it gently on my face, while I flinched from the cold but welcomed the relief. He listened as I explained, and his jaw clenched tighter with every detail before saying, "This can't continue. This house is yours, legally yours. She has no right." And I wiped tears that slipped out while telling him Griffin was on her side and didn't even ask if I was okay, he just defended her. August's fists tightened, and he said Griffin was blind right now, but one day he would wake up and regret everything. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the son I raised was still in there somewhere, but something inside me cracked that night, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. Suddenly, the kitchen door swung open, and Griffin walked in with Sloane right behind him, saying, "Mom, we need to talk," and August immediately rose to block them, saying, "Don't come near her." Griffin protested, saying, "She's my mother. I have the right to talk to her," but August refused to move, saying, "You lost that right when you let your wife hit her and humiliate her in front of everyone." Sloane jumped in, snapping defensively, "It was an accident. She tripped. I didn't touch her." I stared at her because she was lying to everyone without even a hint of guilt on her face. "You pushed me," I said, with my voice shaking but steady. You pushed me and I fell, and then you left me lying on the floor like garbage. Sloane shook her head and forced out fake tears while saying, Marcus, she's lying. She's trying to separate us. She's jealous of what we have. It was unreal watching her flip the whole situation and paint herself as the victim, while Griffin looked at her with worry like he actually believed she needed protection. Evelyn has always been difficult, she went on, pretending to break down. She has treated me badly since the day we met made me feel unwelcome. I just want peace. I want us to be a family. Every word hit like a knife twisting because she was rewriting the truth and Griffin was swallowing every bit of it. Mom, he said, turning toward me. Maybe you need to rest. You're stressed, confused. He said confused twice, as if he were convincing himself I was losing my mind. Elijah snapped. Are you listening to yourself, Marcus? Your mother has a black eye, and you're trying to convince her she's confused. And Griffin dragged his hands over his face, saying he didn't know what to believe since he wasn't there. Sloane clung to him, crying into his shoulder. She hates me, Marcus. She never accepted me. Now she's making things up so you'll kick me out of the house. It was a performance, and it was working. I stood shakily, the ice dropping from my hand, and looked Griffin straight in the eyes, saying, Marcus, I am your mother. I raised you alone after your father died. I gave you everything I had. I loved you unconditionally. And now you're calling me a liar to protect a woman who hit me. My voice cracked at the end. Griffin looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and in that moment, I knew I'd lost him. Not forever, maybe. But in that second, Sloane had control. I want you to leave, I said, gathering whatever pride I had left. This is my house. I want you to pack your things and go. Sloane immediately stopped crying and her face hardened. This house is too big for you alone. You need help. You need supervision. The word supervision burned like acid. Elijah stepped in and said, The only one who needs to leave is you. Evelyn is the legal owner of this property. You can walk out on your own, or we will call the police and have you removed. Griffin finally spoke, and his words crushed me. We're not leaving. This house should be mine. My father built it for our family for me. It's not fair that Mom has everything when I need to start my own family. There it was, the truth. No concern for my pain or my dignity, only for the house, the money, the security. Sloane had planted that seed, and now he claimed it as his own thought. Your father left this house to me because he trusted I would take care of it, I said, shaking. Because he knew it was my safety, my home, and you want to take it away from me. Griffin said nothing. Sloane spoke instead. I'm calling the police right now. Griffin's expression faltered. Uncle, don't do this. I'm your nephew. Elijah looked at him with heartbreak and said, And she is my sister, and you are destroying her for a woman who only wants your money. Sloane laughed coldly. My money. Marcus doesn't have money. Everything is in her name. She pointed at me with pure disdain. That's why we're here. That's why she needs to understand she isn't alone in this anymore. The kitchen door opened again, and in walked Mr. Nolan Thatcher, the family attorney, holding his briefcase, looking around at the tension in the room. Good evening. I heard there was some trouble here. The shift in the atmosphere was instant. Sloane stiffened. Griffin looked stunned. Elijah exhaled in relief. Nolan, perfect timing, Elijah said. We need to clarify the legal ownership of this house. The attorney nodded, opened his briefcase, took out a folder, and said, I brought the necessary documents. I had a feeling they might be required. He stared at Griffin and Sloane, waiting. I believe there is some confusion about the legal situation of this property. Sloane straightened her posture, trying to act unfazed. There's no confusion. We all know the house is in Evelyn's name, but Griffin is her son, her only heir. It will eventually be his. Nolan Thatcher looked at her with a calm expression, though his eyes stayed sharp. That's not exactly correct. He opened the folder and pulled out several papers. He explained that the will of Evelyn's late husband contained certain specific clauses. My heart pounded hard. Clauses. Harold had never mentioned anything like that. The attorney kept going. He said the house was left to Evelyn with absolute ownership, but there was a protective condition included. Griffin's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Nolan looked at me briefly, as if asking for permission to continue, and I nodded because I needed the truth, and everyone else needed it too. It means if Evelyn is pressured, coerced, or forced to leave the property by any family member, the house will not transfer to direct heirs. Instead, it will be donated entirely to a charitable organization named in the will. The silence was overwhelming. Sloane's face turned white. Griffin opened his mouth, but no words came out. Nolan's statement landed like a verdict. Sloane recovered first. "That's ridiculous. It can't be legal," Nolan responded with professional certainty. "It is completely legal." Mr. Mercer made his intentions very clear. He wanted to protect his wife from any type of family pressure after his death. No coercion, no manipulation. He pulled out another sheet. "Here is the exact clause. If Evelyn is forced to sell, donate, or abandon the property under any kind of coercion, the house automatically transfers to the St. Jude Senior Wellness Fund. Griffin would inherit absolutely nothing." Griffin collapsed into a chair, his complexion drained. Dad did that?" It wasn't a question, but a stunned realization. Nolan nodded and explained that Harold was a wise man who had seen many families torn apart by inheritance, and he wanted to ensure I always had a secure home. No pressure, no manipulation. He shot a pointed look straight at Sloane when he repeated that last part. Her fists clenched and any trace of charm disappeared, leaving only anger. August stared at her with disgust and said, "So the whole time, all your planning to push my sister out of her house, all the insults, the shove today, it was all for nothing because you were never going to get this house." Sloane stepped back as if struck. "I didn't have a plan," she muttered, but the emptiness in her voice proved otherwise. We all understood the truth now. The renovations, the talk about increasing value, the conversations about senior facilities, it had all been a calculated attempt to remove me. Griffin stood slowly and really looked at me for the first time in months. Confusion, guilt, and a deep shame showed in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know anything about that clause." My chest tightened. "But you knew how much you were hurting me. You knew I felt pushed aside in my own home, and you did nothing. You chose to believe her instead of me." Griffin tried to speak, but nothing came out because he knew I was right. Sloane instantly switched tactics, her eyes filling with tears again. "Griffin, honey, you have to believe me. I didn't know about any of this. I just wanted us to have our own space. I wanted us to be happy." She clung to his arm. "Don't leave me, please. We're in this together." But Griffin stepped back, and something shifted in his expression, like he was finally seeing things clearly. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked with a low, dangerous tone. Sloane shook her head quickly. "I didn't plan anything. You're misunderstanding," Nolan cut in. "There is something else you both need to know." He pulled another document from his folder. 3 weeks ago, someone requested a professional appraisal on this property. The appraiser reached out because the requester's name did not match the registered owner. Nolan stared directly at Sloane. The request was made by Sloane Whitmore. She paid $500 for a complete appraisal of the house, including future value estimates if certain renovations were made, and the silence that followed was crushing as Griffin stared at his wife like she was a stranger. Nolan continued explaining that 2 weeks earlier, their office had received an inquiry asking about the legal process of declaring an elderly person incompetent to handle their own assets, and my heart nearly stopped because incompetent meant they had tried to label me incapable, and the request came from the same phone number registered to Sloane Whitmore. Nolan closed the folder, saying they did not give her any information, but the attempt was officially recorded. Sloane stumbled back until she hit the wall and snapped, "That's a lie. You're all making this up to turn him against me." Griffin's eyes filled with fury as he asked, "You tried to declare my mother incompetent? You tried to take her house using the law?" And Sloane cried harder, but it was panic, not sorrow, as she insisted. "I was just looking into options. I wasn't going to do anything. I just wanted to know if it was possible." Griffin dragged his hands over his face and said, "My God, what have I done? What did you turn me into?" Staring at her in horror, like he finally realized what we had known for months. August placed his hand on my shoulder and asked, "Evelyn, do you want them to leave tonight?" And I looked at Griffin, my son, the boy I raised, the man he became, who felt like a stranger now, and though a part of me wanted to scream at him and throw him out, another part still loved him, even if that love was hurt and cracked, so I said, tiredly, "Griffin can stay tonight, but she leaves now." Sloane's eyes grew wide and she yelled, "You can't do this. I'm his wife." And I stared at her firmly, saying, "This is my house, and I want you out of it." Griffin said nothing this time, just stared at the floor, while Sloane looked to him, waiting for him to defend her like always. But he didn't move because reality had finally hit him. Nolan spoke in a steady voice. Mrs. Whitmore, I suggest you collect your personal belongings and leave. If you refuse, I can call the authorities. Sloane's expression twisted into pure hatred and she spat. This isn't over. I have rights. I'm Griffin's wife. This house will eventually be mine too. August stepped forward, telling her she clearly didn't listen because this house would never belong to her, and if she kept pushing and trying to force me out, then the house would go to charity, leaving neither her nor Griffin with a single cent. Sloane clenched her teeth, then glared at Griffin one last time, saying, Are you going to let them kick me out like this? Are you choosing her over me? And Griffin finally looked up, his eyes red as he answered, I think you already chose a long time ago. You chose this house over me. Over us. His voice was broken. Sloane let out a bitter laugh, calling him a weak idiot who's never going to leave his mommy's apron strings, then grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed through the house. We stood in silence for a long moment, until Griffin finally spoke barely above a whisper, saying, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. As tears streamed down his face, and he admitted he didn't know how he let it go this far, how he didn't see me anymore. I wanted to hug him and tell him everything was okay, but it wasn't okay, not even close. And I said, She pushed me, Griffin. Your wife pushed me and left me bleeding on the floor, and you defended her in front of everyone on my birthday. Do you have any idea how that felt? Griffin covered his face, trembling, and said he knew and had no excuse that she told him things that made me seem like the problem, and that he believed every word of it. Nolan put his papers away and told me if I needed a restraining order against Sloane, he would handle it, but I shook my head because I just wanted it to be over, and I wanted peace, and for now I only needed her gone for good. He nodded and told me if she tried to contact or threaten me to call immediately, then handed me his card before reminding me he was available any time, and he left, leaving the three of us alone in the kitchen. August finally said Griffin had a decision to make, but that I couldn't keep living under that pressure. And Griffin nodded, still staring down, saying he knew and needed time to think, and needed time to process everything, and he looked down at the wedding ring on his hand where the gold glinted under the kitchen light. He slowly slid it off his finger and set it on the table, and the sound of metal hitting wood felt final and absolute. I could not sleep at all that night. I stayed in my room with the door locked for the first time in years, and my eye pulsed with pain as the swelling spread down to my cheek. Every time I shut my eyes, I replayed the shove, the fall, and Sloane's face staring at me without remorse, and even worse, I saw Griffin defending her in front of everyone, while those words kept looping in my mind. It was my wife who put her in her place, my own son, my baby. How did my life reach this point? I heard movement in the house all night long, footsteps, doors opening and closing, muffled voices, and I didn't know if Griffin was still home or if he left with Sloane. Part of me wanted to know, but another part feared the answer. August stayed in the guest room because he promised not to leave me alone, and that he would remain until he knew I was safe, and his presence was comforting, but it did nothing to stop the ache, crushing my chest, a pain far deeper than any physical bruise. When morning finally arrived, I walked downstairs carefully, and the house sat in heavy silence. Leftover decorations were scattered everywhere, deflated balloons, empty glasses and plates with half-eaten food, all looking sad in the cold morning light. I glanced out the front window and saw Griffin's car still in the driveway, and I did not know whether that comforted me or made everything worse. August appeared in the kitchen doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and handed me one, saying, "You didn't sleep at all." And it wasn't a question, because the dark circles under my eyes told the story. I shook my head and took the cup gratefully, because the strong heat was exactly what I needed. We sat quietly for a moment before August said that Nolan called an hour earlier because Sloane reached out last night trying to negotiate. I asked, "Negotiate what?" And August looked disgusted, explaining she wanted money, and said if Nolan paid her, she would agree to a peaceful divorce and leave without making a public scene, and if not, she would go to the media claiming we kicked her out. My stomach churned because of course she wanted money, since that is all she ever cared about, and I asked how much she wanted. August hesitated, then said $50,000, and the number hit me like a blow because that was a huge sum, and I did not have that kind of cash available, and I would need to sell investments or take a loan against the house, and answered firmly, "I'm not paying her anything. She assaulted me. She manipulated my son to try to take my home. She doesn't deserve a cent." August nodded, saying that was exactly what he told Nolan, and Nolan agreed that her threats were empty, and she had no legal case. Then we heard steps on the stairs, and Griffin walked in looking awful with puffy eyes, wrinkled clothes, and hair, a mess, showing he barely slept either. He looked at both of us nervously and said, "Good morning," with a rough voice, and August ignored him while I simply nodded. He shakily poured himself coffee, and the silence felt unbearably heavy until he finally spoke, saying Sloane checked into a hotel and sent him messages all night. He paused and said she wanted to talk and fix things, and August scoffed, asking how anyone could fix something after everything she had done. Griffin sank into a chair and said he knew it sounded ridiculous, but she was his wife, and they had been together for 2 years, so he could not just end it like that. I stared at him in disbelief and reminded him, "Griffin, she tried to declare me incompetent. She looked into taking my house. She hit me and left me bleeding. And you want to fix things with her?" And my voice rose because I needed him to understand. "What more does she have to do for you to open your eyes?" Griffin rubbed his face and admitted I was right, but said it was complicated because he loved her, or maybe he loved her, and now he did not know anything anymore. His voice cracked as he said, everything was confusing, and he thought he knew her and believed they were happy until he learned it was all a lie and that she only wanted the house, and he was just a tool to get what she wanted, and tears fell. Again, as he said, he felt like a fool and completely used. A part of me wanted to comfort him because he was still my son, but the wound inside me was still too raw for that. The pain was too deep. "Griffin, she didn't just use you, she destroyed me too. She turned my home into a place where I felt like an outsider. She made me feel like I was always in the way. She humiliated me in front of everyone, and you let her. You were part of it." Griffin nodded miserably. "I know, and I'll never be able to forgive myself." He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Will you be able to forgive me someday?" I did not know what to say. Could I ever forgive him? A mother's love does not disappear instantly, but the trust had been shattered and the respect was damaged. "I don't know, Griffin. I need time. I need space. I need to heal." My voice sounded exhausted. "And you need to decide what kind of man you want to be, because the man who defended his wife after she hit his mother is not the son I raised." August stood up. "I'm going to be direct, Griffin. You need to leave this house for a while. Your mother needs peace. She needs to feel safe in her own home, and right now, your presence only brings her pain." Griffin turned pale. "You want me to leave my childhood home?" August did not hesitate. "This isn't your home. It's your mother's home. And after what happened yesterday, she has every right to ask you to leave." Griffin looked at me, begging me to say he could stay, but I didn't because August was right. I needed Griffin out of the house. I needed air. I needed my space back. "I think it's best," I finally said, "for now until things calm down." Griffin shut his eyes like the words physically hurt him. "Okay," he whispered. "I understand." He slowly got up. "I'm going to pack some things." I watched him walk up the stairs with his shoulders low, looking defeated, and even though part of me still cared, the other part that had been betrayed felt nothing but relief that he would soon be gone. August placed his hand over mine. "You did the right thing." I nodded, though I was not sure of anything because nothing felt right. Half an hour later, Griffin came downstairs carrying 2 suitcases and paused in the living room doorway where I Saturday. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a few days until I find an apartment." He hesitated. "Mom, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, I'm sorry. I was a coward, a bad son. I will have to live with that for the rest of my life." His voice cracked. "I love you. I've always loved you, and I regret failing you so much." I stood up and walked toward him, and for a second we just stared at each other. Then I did something I didn't expect. I hugged him. It was short and tense and full of pain, but it was all I could give him. "I love you too," I whispered. "That's why this hurt so much." We let go. Griffin picked up his suitcases and walked out. I heard his car start, then fade down the street until silence swallowed the house. I sank onto the couch and finally cried. I cried for my son, for the relationship that had fallen apart, for the trust that had been shattered, and for the heartbreak of watching someone you love choose someone else over you again and again. August sat next to me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders while I cried, and he did not try to fix anything. He just stayed. Sometimes that is the only comfort you need. The next days passed like a fog. The house was quiet in a way I had never felt before. It was not peaceful silence. It was the heavy silence of absence of words not said, of a family broken. Every morning I looked in the mirror, and watched the bruise change from dark purple to yellow-green, a reminder of everything that had happened painted on my face. August stayed with me the first week. He cooked when I had no strength. He answered calls when I could not bear to speak. Many people called after the party, some genuinely worried, others hungry for gossip disguised as concern. "Is it true what happened, Evelyn? Did your daughter-in-law really hit you? Did Griffin really defend her?" August shut them down quickly. "My sister needs privacy. Thank you for calling." Then he would hang up without another word. Griffin sent messages every day. At first they were long, filled with apologies and explanations about how Sloane had manipulated him, how he finally saw everything clearly, and how he wanted to make things right, but I read them without replying. I had no idea what to say, because his words felt hollow, and the apologies came far too late. The damage was already done. As the days passed, the messages grew shorter, more desperate. "Mom, please talk to me. I just want to know you're okay. I miss you." But I still did not respond, because I needed quiet and space to process everything I had endured. One afternoon, Nolan Thatcher, the attorney, came by with news. He said Sloane had hired her own lawyer and filed for divorce. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, relief that she would be leaving our lives, and sadness that Griffin's marriage had turned into such a disaster. I asked what she wanted, and Nolan said she was demanding compensation for the 2 years of marriage, claiming she quit her job to support Griffin and deserved a portion of marital assets. I told him Griffin had nothing, that everything he used belonged to me, the house, the investments, everything. Nolan nodded and said exactly which was why her lawyer was trying to claim Griffin should receive an accelerated inheritance, that I should give him part of my estate so he could pay her in the divorce. I was stunned. Even after everything, Sloane was still trying to get my money, only now through Griffin as a legal excuse. I asked, trembling, if that was going to work. Nolan shook his head firmly, saying, "Absolutely not, that there is no forced inheritance, and I alone decide what to do with my estate, and no one could demand anything from me, especially after what happened." I exhaled in relief and asked if Griffin knew what she was attempting. Nolan said he was not sure, but that Griffin should know since it was his divorce. That night, I finally sent Griffin a message, the first in 2 weeks, asking, "Do you know Sloane is asking me to give you money to pay her?" And he replied almost instantly saying, "What? No, I didn't know anything about that." Then another message came. "Mom, I swear I didn't ask her for anything. I don't want your money. I just want to fix things between us." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think he was not involved in her plan, but my trust was too shattered to know what was real anymore. 2 more weeks passed. The bruise on my face faded, but the pain in my heart did not. August had to return to his job and his own life. He hugged me before leaving and said, "You're going to be okay. You are stronger than you think." I nodded, though I did not feel strong at all. I felt broken, old, and alone. The house felt even emptier after he left. One afternoon, the doorbell rang, and I was not expecting anyone. A young woman stood outside, a stranger. I opened the door carefully. "Mrs. Mercer?" she asked with a friendly smile, and I nodded. She said she was a private investigator, hired by my son's attorney, and my heart raced. Griffin hired an investigator? For what? She explained she had been digging into Sloane Whitmore's financial background and found things I needed to know. I invited her in, and we sat in the living room where she opened a folder stuffed with documents. She told me Sloane had a long pattern of targeting older or widowed men with assets, and that her previous marriage ended when the husband's family discovered she was falsifying documents to transfer property into her own name. A chill ran through me. I asked if Griffin knew. The investigator nodded and said he was the one who hired her because once he started suspecting, he needed to uncover the truth. Then she said Sloane was a professional scammer with more than $80,000 in gambling debt and loan sharks after her, and that was why she needed this house so badly. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rush to get married, the insistence on moving in, the constant talk about the property's value, and the effort to declare me incompetent. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. She needed a way out of her mess, and saw Griffin, me, and this house as her solution. The investigator continued, saying there was more. Sloane had contacted real estate agents 3 months before my birthday, asking how long it would take to sell a property if the owner was declared unfit to handle their own affairs, and she had put together a detailed plan. I covered my mouth, stunned. The horror of what could have happened washed over me like a wave, because if I had been weaker, if August had not been there, if Nolan Thatcher had not shown up with those documents, Sloane might have succeeded and taken everything from me, my home, my freedom, my dignity. Griffin saw all this? I asked, and the investigator nodded, saying yes, and that he was devastated, and that was why he was moving forward with the divorce without resistance, because he wanted her gone from his life as soon as possible. After the investigator left, I sat alone for a long time, trying to make sense of what I learned, because Sloane was even worse than I imagined, not just ambitious or manipulative, but a criminal, a predator who hunted vulnerable people, and she almost ruined my life, and almost destroyed my son. The phone rang, and it was Griffin, and I hesitated before answering but eventually picked up. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded deeply tired, and I confirmed to him that the investigator had come to see me, and there was a long silence before he said, "Now you understand why I feel so stupid, so used. I married a scammer, and I never saw the signs." I told him she was skilled at deception and had fooled both of us, and he sighed, saying, "But you saw it before I did. You tried to warn me, and I did not listen. I treated you terribly to defend her, and I have to live with that." His voice cracked. "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" And the question hung heavy between us. I closed my eyes, thinking of the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, but also the good years, the boy I raised, the man he could still become if he learned from this. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I said honestly. "But I want to try with time, with space, with therapy maybe." I heard Griffin breathe as if he had been holding the air inside his chest. "I want to try too, Mom. I want us back. I want to be the son I should have been, the son Dad would have wanted me to be." Tears streamed down my face as I told him his father would be disappointed in what happened, but would also believe in second chances because he always did. We spoke a little more carefully, cautiously, like two people trying to recognize each other again after a long time. When we hung up, I felt unexpectedly lighter because it wasn't forgiveness and not even real reconciliation, but it was a first step, a tiny crack in the wall between us, and for now that was enough. The next months were about slow healing, like when a bone breaks and you have to wait for it to mend, knowing it may never be exactly the same again. Griffin and I met once a week, always in public places, a coffee shop, a park, spaces that felt neutral and safe. The first few times were awkward, with long pauses and brief glances, but slowly, very slowly, we began to rediscover something familiar. Griffin started therapy, and one afternoon over coffee he said, "The therapist says I was a victim of psychological abuse, that Sloane used classic manipulation tactics, isolation, gaslighting, gradual control," and then he paused before saying, "But that doesn't excuse me, Mom. I made choices too. I chose to believe her over you. I ignored all the signs, and I have to live with that." I nodded, because being a victim did not erase the consequences of his actions. The divorce process was long and ugly, and Sloane fought everything, asking for compensation for her time, demanding emotional damages, and even asking for the clothes Griffin had bought her, and her lawyer kept sending letters full of threats. But Nolan Thatcher was relentless and presented every piece of evidence the investigator found, including her debts, her searches on how to declare someone incompetent, her past marriages, and repeated fraud patterns. Eventually, Sloane's lawyer advised her to accept a quick, clean settlement or face criminal charges. One afternoon, Nolan called with the update and said, "Sloane settled. The divorce is finalized. She gets nothing but her personal belongings, and there is a permanent restraining order. She cannot come within 200 yards of you or Griffin." Relief washed through me finally, because she was gone, completely gone. I asked where she was now, and Nolan said she left the state, probably running from debt collectors, and that it was no longer our concern. Griffin moved into a small apartment and invited me to see it one Saturday. It was modest, a single bedroom, simple furniture, nothing fancy, but it felt clean and real, and there were family photos on the walls, pictures of him growing up, pictures with Harold, pictures of us before everything fell apart. "I'm starting over," he said while making tea. "No pretending, no living beyond my means. Just me working and healing." He showed me around with a quiet pride, and he was not the same man who had defended Sloane that horrible night. But the real test came months later. It was a quiet Sunday when Griffin visited the house for the first time since he left. He slowly walked around, touching the walls and looking at the photos, remembering everything. When we got to the kitchen, he stopped and said softly, "This is where everything blew up. This is where Uncle August told me Dad would be ashamed of me." Tears filled his eyes. He was right. Dad would be ashamed. I am ashamed. We sat at the same table where we had eaten countless meals, and Griffin said, Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen until I finish. I nodded, and he took a deep breath, saying he had been working in therapy on accountability and facing mistakes, and realized something. He paused. Sloane manipulated me, yes, but I let her because deep down, a part of me wanted this house. I wanted what Dad built, and that made it easier for her to control me. I stayed quiet, letting him speak. When she said things about you that you were difficult or stuck in the past, I never stopped her. Why? Because a selfish part of me thought if you left the house would be mine, not consciously, not intentionally, but the seed was there. Tears streamed down his face. And that makes me just as guilty, because my own ambition and greed helped all of this happen. It was painful to hear, but it was the truth we had both avoided. I appreciate your honesty, I finally said. And you are right. Sloane could not have used you if she did not find something inside you to grab onto. Griffin nodded miserably. I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me completely, or for things to return to how they were. I just hope that with time I can show you I am better than my worst decisions. I reached across the table and he took my hand and I said, Your father and I raised you to be a good man, and good men make mistakes, sometimes big ones, but they learn and grow and earn redemption. I won't pretend everything is fine because it isn't, but I am willing to walk with you while you work on yourself. That is all I can offer right now. Griffin broke down and stood to hug me, a long embrace, asking for forgiveness without words. I hugged him back, my son trying to rebuild himself. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I cried with him for what we lost, and for what we still might rebuild, and for the long road ahead. After that day, something truly shifted. It felt like the wound had finally been cleaned. It hurt, but now it could start to heal. Griffin began visiting more often, not too much, careful not to push, but each week, each month, we slowly rebuilt pieces of our bond. We sometimes had dinner together. He fixed things around the house. I cooked meals he always loved. One day he told me he had met someone, a coworker. She's nothing like Sloane. She's honest, transparent. She has her own apartment, her own car, her own life. She doesn't need anything from me except companionship, he said shyly. And this time, I'm going slow. This time I'm looking for the signs. This time, I'm going to listen if you see something I don't. I smiled and told him, I'd love to meet her. Whenever you're ready, no pressure. Months turned into a year, then 2. The anniversary of that awful birthday passed quietly. We celebrated with just Griffin, August, and me. Something small, peaceful. I blew out my candles and Griffin hugged me, saying, Happy birthday, Mom, I love you. And this time those words felt true and earned. 2 years after that terrible night, I was in my backyard tending to the roses Harold planted decades ago, with morning sun warming my back and the flowers blooming beautifully in red, yellow, and peach, showing how something that seems dead in winter can return stronger in spring. I heard a car stop out front, and it was Griffin, but he wasn't alone. A woman stepped out of the passenger side, Brenda. I met her 6 months earlier at a simple dinner. She was a middle school teacher with a kind smile and gentle eyes, and most importantly, she treated Griffin like an equal. She did not flatter him. She did not manipulate him. She simply shared his life in a healthy, balanced way. Hi, Mom, Griffin said, greeting me with a kiss on the cheek, and Brenda hugged me warmly. Mrs. Mercer, the roses look beautiful. I smiled at her. Thank you, sweetheart. Your help last month made all the difference. We went inside, and I had prepared lunch, chicken gumbo with rice and a fresh salad. We sat at the table, the same one where so much had happened, but now the bad memories were slowly being replaced with new, better ones. We ate and talked about everyday things. Griffin's work, Brenda's students, the flowers in the yard. It felt normal and calm, the way life should have always been. After lunch, Griffin and I sat on the porch in the rocking chairs Harold had built, and he finally said, Mom, I need to tell you something. My heart jumped for a second, and he quickly added, It's good news, I promise, and I exhaled in relief. All right, tell me. Griffin looked at me and said, I asked Brenda to marry me, and she said yes. My first reaction was joy, but fear followed as memories of Sloane surfaced, and Griffin noticed my concern. I know what you're thinking, and I get it. After Sloane, I was scared too. But Mom, Brenda is different, completely different. He continued explaining that Brenda knew everything about the past that he told her about Sloane and the way he treated me, and she did not run. And there's something else. She insisted on a prenup. She doesn't want anything of mine if things don't work out. That surprised me and gave me hope. When is the wedding? I asked, and Griffin smiled, saying they had not set a date yet, but before planning anything he needed my blessing, and that Brenda said she would not marry him unless I felt comfortable because family should be built on respect. My eyes filled with tears. You have my blessing, I said emotionally. Brenda is a good woman, I can see that. Griffin hugged me. Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me. Then he added, Mom, about this house, I want you to know I will never ask you to leave. This is your house, your home, and it will stay that way until the day you choose otherwise. Brenda and I will build our own life somewhere else. We do not want this house. Those words released something inside me I had been holding for too long. Brenda stepped onto the porch. Did you tell her? She asked, smiling, and Griffin nodded. She sat on the floor in front of my chair and said, Mrs. Mercer, I know I have big shoes to fill. I want you to know I respect everything you have gone through, and if you ever feel I am crossing a line, I hope you will tell me directly without fear. I looked into her eyes and they were sincere. Thank you for saying that, Brenda. And please call me Evelyn. She smiled wide. Only if you call me daughter when you are ready. My heart squeezed because I once had a daughter-in-law who used that word like a weapon. Could I risk having another? I would like that, I finally said. I would like that very much, daughter. Brenda stood and hugged me, a real hug with no hidden intentions. Griffin watched us with tears in his eyes. His family, once broken, was learning to heal. The next months were full of wedding plans, and this time I was included because Brenda asked for my thoughts, not out of obligation, but because she valued them. The wedding was in a lovely garden, small, intimate, only close family and genuine friends. When Griffin and Brenda said their vows, I cried, but these were tears of joy, not pain. At the reception, August sat beside me and asked how I felt, and after thinking, I said, at peace. For the first time in a long time, I truly felt peace. August smiled and lifted his glass. To peace, to healing, to endings that are really new beginnings. We toasted. People laughed, danced, and celebrated, and I was part of it, no longer invisible, no longer pushed aside. That night, back at my home, I sat in the living room. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of memories, full of lessons, full of second chances. I looked at Harold's photo on the mantel. We did it, I said out loud. I protected what we built. I protected our son even when it meant letting him go. And now I think we're going to be okay. I stood and walked through the house. Every room had a story. The kitchen where Sloan and I had our final confrontation. The living room where I had been humiliated in front of everyone. But also the table where Griffin and I began to rebuild our bond. The porch where he asked for my blessing. The garden where Harold's roses bloomed every year without failing. This house witnessed my darkest moment, but also my greatest strength. Here I learned that protecting myself is not selfish. I learned that setting boundaries is not cruel. I learned that sometimes the strongest act of love is refusing to be broken, because only by remaining whole can you be there when the people you love finally wake up, when they finally choose to be better. I went up to my room and looked in the mirror. 72 years old, with lines that held stories and eyes that had seen pain but also redemption. You survived, I told myself. More than that, you won not through revenge or hate, but by staying true to who you are. I lay down in my own bed, in my own house, my sanctuary that no one could take from me. Sometimes protecting the past is how you save the future. Harold knew that when he wrote that clause in his will, he knew I would need protection one day, and he made sure I had the strength to defend myself even after he was gone. Because of that, I stayed firm. I said no. I demanded respect in my own home, and in the end that strength saved not just my house, but also my son. I closed my eyes grateful. Grateful for surviving, for healing, for a second chance with Griffin, for meeting Brenda, for having August always there for me. Life hit me hard. It showed me the worst in those I loved, but it also showed me my own strength, a strength I never realized I had until I desperately needed it. If you are facing something similar, if someone is trying to take what is yours, if you feel invisible in your own life, listen to me. Resist, stand strong, ask for help, trust yourself, and always remember that protecting yourself is never selfishness. It is survival, it is self-love, it is justice. The truth always comes out, and those who stay true to themselves, those who refuse to be destroyed, are the ones who eventually find peace. Did you enjoy my story? And which city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. If you like this story, you can support me with a super thanks. so I can continue sharing more stories with you here on Stories of Mom Donna. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. I can't wait to read your comments. On the screen, you'll find 2 more life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more to explore on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect on Stories of Mom Donna.